No, actually, I didn't add any snare verb, but yeah, I'll hold off on that. But yeah, so that would be your basic drum mic setup. But if you have the ability to do room mics, then I definitely recommend that. So pretty much with room mics, I very rarely do any EQ. Uh, I usually just compress the crap out of them and mix that in. So let's see what we got with the room mics. So yeah, the room mics just add basically a little bit of reverb, a little bit of room sound. My room honestly isn't the greatest sounding, but just compressing the crap out of the mics helps. So I'm gonna let you listen real quick with and without the room mics. See, they don't do much, but they just add just a little bit more life to them. All right, now I'm going to throw that reverb on the snare. So we already got it routed. We just got to actually pull up the reverb plugin. There's another Slate plugin. It's their Verb Suite Classic. For snare, I really like the CLA snare preset. And I usually tweak it a little bit, but let's hear what it sounds like on these. Yeah, I don't think that needs to be tweaked at all. It's just perfect. So now we're not quite done. There's one more thing. If the drums really need to be like tight as hell and loud and bombastic, then we can do a little parallel compression. So you'll see here I have a bus called P drums. It's just parallel drums. And it's processed separately from the regular drum bus. But basically, we're going to send a copy of the close mics on the drums. So not the overheads, not the rooms, but the kick, the sub kick, the snare top and bottom, and the three toms. We have those routed to the P drums, and we have them set to follow main pan, so they'll be panned the same way that any of these drums are. And we just have it set to 0 so that it'll follow the same, whatever these faders are set, it'll follow the same general mix. So there's a copy of all those being sent over to P drums. And then again, we just compress the hell out of it. So I'm just going to use this distressor emulation. And yeah, we have the attack all the way to 10, releases all the way to 0. We have it set to the nuke ratio, and we'll adjust the input and output as we see fit. But let's just bring, with those presets, let's bring the P drums into the mix and see what it sounds like. Just immediately you can hear the difference. It just pops so much more. So I'll show you real quick again with and without the P drums. It just adds so much meat to those drums. I love parallel compressing drums. Anyway, that's how I would normally go through and mix drums. Now we're going to go back and I'll go through all the moves I made. So obviously just bringing the faders up to where I thought they needed to be. And then after that, for the kick drum, first of all, each of these I have started with a virtual channel strip. And for drums, I generally set it to Brit N, which is basically just a Neve emulation. And then that's going into another Neve emulation for EQ. We have the high pass on just a hair at 31 hertz on the main kick. That's just to get rid of some of the really muddy lows on that mic. Then we have a shelf boost of about almost 4 dB at just under 60 hertz. We're at 57 hertz. We're doing a shelf. Everything below that we boosted. Then we did a 5.5 dB cut out of 427 hertz. You'll notice I take out between 400 and 500 hertz. I take out of almost every drum close mic. I find that 400 hertz in drums is just, it doesn't sound good to me. Some people might like it. Depending on how your drum's tuned, it might sound okay one day, but for the most part, between 400 and 500 on every single drum I'm going to take out. And then we have another little boost of about 2 dB at 4.6K. And then we have this high shelf here. I'd have to look up what the frequency of the shelf on this is. But yeah, that's just boosting. I'm pretty sure it's at like 14K, I want to say. Yeah, so it's just giving a little 2 dB boost, everything above that. And then I also did a little bit more. The kick had a lot of bleed in it, as I'm sure you heard when I first started. So I did a little bit extra EQ in here. That's why I have a second EQ strip in here. So we're doing a little 3 dB boost at 5.4K. That's just to bring out the beater a little bit more, get some more attack out of it. And we're doing a almost 6 dB cut of 205 hertz. And that, again, it was just a little muddy. All right, then compression. We have a 3-to-1 ratio. How much gain reduction were we getting on that? Yeah, so 3-to-1 ratio, we're getting about 5 dB of gain reduction, and a moderate attack setting and a moderate release setting, and a little bit of makeup gain. And then this thing, Revival, it's just a saturation plugin, and I find it beefs up all the drums really well. Actually, it beefs up pretty much everything really well. I use this plugin on almost everything at this point. So the thickness, that's just beefing up the low end, and the shimmer, that's beefing up the high end. I'll just show you real quick. Let me solo the kick drum, and I'll show you what this sounds like turned on and off. See, it's really subtle, but it's there. So that's how I did the main kick mic. Now for the sub kick, I just did a low pass. I cut off everything above 120 hertz. I honestly probably would have gone lower, but this plugin won't let me go any lower than that. And then I did a 3 dB boost at 44 hertz, just because that's what the sub kick's for. It's just for the really sub lows. It just gives you a little more beef. The compression, I'm at 20 millisecond attack, 127 millisecond release, 3-to-1 ratio, and that's just... Honestly, I probably should have used some makeup gain on that, but I didn't. It just keeps it really subtle. If you are on just your computer speakers or headphones, especially earbuds or your phone speaker, God forbid, there's no way you heard that track just now, because that's all the really low frequencies. If you really want to hear what that track sounds like, you're going to need to get on to a good pair of studio monitors, or at the very least, a good pair of studio headphones. Then we're going to move on to the snare. On the snare top, we're again got the slate channel pulled up. We're again on the Neve emulation for the channel strip. And then we're cutting everything below 70 hertz, just because the snare doesn't really go that low. Honestly, we probably could have gone up to about 100, but I feel like there's just a little bit of roll off if we go too far above that. Then we got a shelf boost of 3 dB for everything below 170 hertz. Again, it's just beefing up some of the low end. Almost 4 dB cut at 470 hertz. Like I said before, between 400 and 500 hertz, I'll almost always cut on drums. We got a almost 5 dB boost on 4.4K. And that's just that crack of the snare. And again, a high shelf of about 1.5 dB. Again, I think it's 14K. And I also did another little boost here. I boosted 5.5 dB of 255 hertz. Around 250 hertz, that's really the meat of the snare in most instances, depending on your tuning. Then we got a 3-to-1 ratio. We got a pretty slow attack, just because we want most of that snare shot to come through, and a moderate release, because that way it doesn't cut off too early. It gives us a little more of the tone, because we like some tone out of the snare. We don't want it to be just attack, usually. Then again, revival, just a little bit of the low end, a little bit of shimmer. And then let's go to the bottom snare mic. Make sure to remember, I mentioned in the recording part where you're miking up the kit, but you want your bottom snare mic to be inverted so the phase doesn't cancel out, because they're pointing opposite at each other. The top and bottom mics at the same sound source are going to get an opposite polarity, so you need to invert the phase. If you didn't do it at the recording phase, if you didn't have the ability, like if your interface didn't have the ability to switch the polarity for just a single input, then you can always do that in the box. Most plugins, just basic stock EQ plugins, will have, see this little symbol? That'll inverse the phase. So it's already inverted, but because I did that in the recording phase, but had I not, this is what the snare would sound like. I just flipped it so that it's the way it was originally sounding before I flipped it in recording. So it would cancel the snare out. See, it just sounds really thin, but then if we flip it back around so that they're in phase with each other, yeah, so you just get all that low end back. But yeah, if you didn't have the ability to flip the polarity going into the box, then you can always do it from an EQ plugin in the box. Anyway, snare bottom. We are once again the Neve emulation. We're cutting everything below 67.2 hertz. We're doing a shelf boost of almost 6 dB Everything below 220 hertz, that's just pretty much all the low end between 220 and what was it, 67. Then we got a 4 dB cut at 427 hertz. Like I said, that 400, 500 hertz range. We got about 4.5 dB boost of 1.7K. That's just going to be the snare wires, so you hear those. And we have a almost 2.5 dB boost, shelf boost of everything above it. Again, I think it's 14. No additional EQ past that first one on that one. Then we have a 3-to-1 ratio. Again, a slow attack. A little bit of a faster release on this one. And a little bit of thickness, a little bit of shimmer. Now let's move on to the toms. Toms, I find I do the most processing on of all the drums. Well, not necessarily the most, but the most extreme. So I usually gate the toms because they pick up so much background noise between the cymbals and the kick and the snare. I almost always gate the toms. If it was really bad, if you didn't mic your kit properly, or if you're mixing something that was mic'd by someone else that wasn't mic'd properly, you might have to go in and manually gate the toms, which would mean that I would have to go into the track and take everything that's not a tom hit and mute it, like on all sides of all the toms, which is a pain and it takes time. So hopefully you can just gate it and you don't have to deal with that. But anyway, the first tom, it's a 12-inch tom. Again, going to the Neve emulation. We're cutting everything below 35. I find that the toms have a lot of tone in the really high and the really low range. The mids on toms I usually don't like. So we're doing a boost, almost 6 dB boost of everything below 143 hertz. We're doing an almost 6 dB cut of 531 hertz. And you'll find that as you're going through the toms, as you go from the smallest tom to the largest, as the tone gets lower, you'll pretty much be doing the same EQ, but just shifting everything down. So this one is at 143 hertz. So on the second tom, it'll probably be closer to 100. And this is at 531. So you'll probably be cutting closer to like 470 on the next one, and so on. Then we got a 4.5 dB boost almost at 2.82K, and just a teeny tiny, less than 2 dB boost of the high frequencies. 3-to-1 ratio, slow attack because we want to get as much of the attack out of the drum as we can. Moderate release time, we want a little bit more tone out of these. And then decent amount of thickness and a little bit of shimmer. Now let's go on to the second tom. Again, Neve emulation. I only cut everything below 30.8 hertz. Again, a 3.5 dB boost at 78. So I didn't go to 100. I went a little lower. It's at 78. Almost 5 dB cut at 445, and a 5 dB boost at 1.78. So you can see it's just moving down. You'll see in the next one it moves even lower. And then we got just a 2 dB boost of the high frequencies. This time we did a 3.5 to 1 ratio, an even slower attack and a slower release so we can get more of the sustain out of it. And then we have some thickness, some shimmer. Third tom, the lowest tom, it's a 16-inch Neve emulation. Just a hair of the low cut to get the really sub lows out of there. So we're at 30.1. We are doing a 5 dB boost of 70 hertz. We are doing a 5 dB cut of 404 hertz. We're doing a 4 dB boost of 1.09K. And we're doing an almost 3 dB shelf of the really high frequencies. 3-to-1 ratio, slower attack, slower release. and some thickness, some shimmer. So yeah, as you can see, all the toms are processed very similarly. It just moves lower and lower with the frequency. All right, let's move on to the overheads. The overheads, I usually do very little processing. Sometimes I'll compress them, sometimes I won't. This time I didn't. Literally, all I did was on the bus of the overhead, so I'm affecting both overheads at once. I cut everything below 728 hertz, and I did just a 0.8 dB boost of everything above 6K. Really simple. It's just a lot of people will use the overheads to pick up the whole kit. I'm pretty much just using the overheads as simple mics. Let's move on to the rooms. So the stereo room pair, I compressed with a distressor. Attacks at 7, releases at 3. Reasonable amount of input, and we nuked it. Then the cab room in the room center, I just used a CLA 2A plugin. It's obviously an LA2A emulation. And yeah, we just threw that on the limit setting and we crushed them pretty good. And then we have all of those, the stereo rooms and both of those sent to the room bus, and we just mixed that in. And then the last piece of processing we did was the P drums. So that the attack's all the way up, the release is all the way down. And again, set to nuke, we're just crushing the crap out of, again, the P drums is just the main close mics to the drums sent. None of the overheads or rooms, just the kick in, the sub kick, snare top and bottom, and tom 1, 2, and 3 are being sent to the P drums. So I'm going to show you a little bit of the drums with and without the processing. So let's just turn all those off and let's listen without the processing what the drums sound like. Actually, I'm just going to let you play through the whole track. And yeah. So that was everything without any of the plugins. Let's listen to it again with all the processing on. So yeah, that's how you record drums and process drums. As you can see, we got a pretty good tone starting off with just the mics, and it just got better with the processing on it. So hope you guys enjoyed that. If you did, I would really appreciate it if you could hit that subscribe button, hit the little notification bell so you can be notified of when we come out with new videos. And seriously, please leave me some comments. I'd love to hear from you. I don't care if they're positive or negative. Any feedback is welcome. I'm open to hearing it. I got some good comments recently telling me to adjust a couple things, and I'm going to work on that in the future. So any feedback is welcome. Let me know. I'd love to hear from you. And thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.